Welcome to the STA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your co-host for today from NDIS Property Australia here in Brisbane. And you're listening to the STA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things STA in this ever-changing NDIS world. But today's topic is not SDA, it's STA. And my co-host today is Rob Maxwell from Plan for Life Australia, our regular guest speaker on some of our episodes. Rob, welcome today.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here. Listeners, let's have a chat about short-term accommodation.
So, Rob, what is short-term accommodation, aka Respite Accommodation?
It's where participants that have got NDIS funding can look to have up to 4 weeks a year of funding included in their plans to be able to go to another location and stay in a home in a different location. So whether it's a getaway or whether it's a little bit of a holiday for them, or it could be that their parents or carers need a break and want to go away themselves. So the participants need somewhere to stay for a couple of days, a weekend, even up to a week. So it's called short-term accommodation for that purpose, and each participant can have anywhere up to 4 weeks included in their management plan per year of funding. But as you know, Minh, they can also potentially use their existing funding as part of their existing plan if they need to as well for some of that.
If our listeners want to get a better understanding of STA, they can go to Google and search short-term accommodation within the NDIS website. And let me just read the official definition here. So short-term accommodation, including respite, is funding for support and accommodation for a short time away from your usual home. It covers the cost of your care in another place for up to 14 days at a time. You may have a short stay with other people or by yourself. It's often funded when your usual carers aren't available or for you to try new things. Okay. So what the question you listeners must be asking is, why are we even bringing up this topic of STA in a SDA podcast? Rob, you want to explain why we're talking about this today?
We're talking about this because in order for these participants to be able to stay somewhere, and what we're looking to do at Plan for Life Australia in consultation with NDIS Property Australia, is that we're reaching out to supported independent living workers, we're reaching out to support coordinators, plan managers, SDA managers, and letting them know that we can potentially help participants be placed into an accommodation in different areas where they might want to have one of these short-term accommodation breaks. So in order to be able to do that, we need to have the locations with the houses in them to supply. So for your viewers, think of it a couple of ways. One is it'd be great if it is an existing NDIS-approved STA home. You may not have tenants currently, or you may be looking at options going forward to build these as to what you can do from an income point of view, where they could be used for respite accommodation via us and our website, so we could go into some sort of partnership there. It also could be that you may have an existing investment property in a location that's reasonably desirable for people to spend a few days in, whether it's down the beach, whether it's in the city of Melbourne. It could be up north on the Murray River near Echuca, Albury, just an area that is desirable for participants to potentially have a break in. We may be able to use that as well as an alternative for investors who may be looking at using stays or Airbnb, for example. So it's just another revenue option separate to STA accommodation.
Last year in 2021, I think it was August or September, a year ago, the NDIS program modified the rules to allow participants to tap into their core funding to use for STA. Now, an STA/MTA accommodation doesn't need to comply with the SDA build guidelines that everyone's aware of with regards to SDA, Specialist Disability Accommodation. So this topic is relevant to us today because if you are an investor under two paths, one is you have an SDA dwelling, apartment or a house that is vacant or empty. It could be used as short-term accommodation. If you are a property investor who has a normal dwelling, an apartment on the beach, a place up in the mountains, a house which could be used for short-term stay, like staycation, for participants who want time away from home, or giving their parents a break, then this is what we're trying to search for. People who want to contribute in this way. So we talk about social impact in our podcast. Social impact doesn't mean buying a SDA dwelling as a property investment. It could be providing accommodation by other means. And this is the very topic here, STA/MTA. So Rob, and you and I have been talking about this respite accommodation topic for the last year and a half or so. What information have you gleaned from this niche area, which is still a very complex area in itself of SDA, that you want to impart to our listeners?
A couple of things. One, it's still very early days in regards to the participants and their families even knowing about the option to have STA funding put in their plan, or as you said, that they can use part of their existing core funding in order to go on these getaways. And what's interesting there is we chatted about this a couple of weeks ago where a lot of the funding isn't being used up in the year for the participants.
75% of everyone's funding is only used. So 25% is actually unused at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the average across Australia for a NDIS participant is around $60,000 to $70,000 a year.
74,000 per participant.
Which is around 15,000 roughly is not being used, which could be a week away in one of these accommodation options for STA. So what we're looking to do, and in our feedback and speaking to the plan managers and the support coordinators and the SILs that we're dealing with, is that once this is advertised and they're made aware of these options, and we're doing that through the website and hence this podcast as well, in order to find them attractive options that they can look to stay in, then there will be significant demand straight away for participants to take up this option for accommodation of up to 2 weeks. So it's certainly a growth area. It's an area that's undersupplied in terms of there's not many companies out there doing it and providing this type of accommodation. So hence it's a niche in the market that could fill what you talked about earlier quite easily in terms of helping.
Yeah, it's a very lucrative niche, isn't it, Rob?
It can be, yes. Similar to Airbnb, if you get that right, and you've got significant accommodation and not much vacancy. You could be looking at $300 a night as a return for this. So if it's filled up most nights of the week, that's a couple of $1,000s potentially a year on one of these properties. Actually,
the best way to explain this, Rob, is imagine if the two entities came together. They were Airbnb and NDIS, and they produced a little baby, right? And that baby is called STA, Respite Accommodation.
Yep.
So that's the best way to explain to you as an investor or listener what this is all about. Because we know that when you go on a holiday, you can go to a hotel and pay you $200 a night, $250 a night for a hotel room, right? Or you can go to an Airbnb 3-bedder, right? And there's your, or 2-bedder or 3-bedder, whatever it is. And you can use that dwelling for your little holiday. Now, this is pretty much the same thing, but it's in the NDIS environment. So where there is a participant who lives at home with mum and dad or whoever they are, mum and dad want to have a break. They've been looking after their child who's a participant for the last 20, 30, 40 years of their life, and they're tired. They need a break for a week or a weekend or a day. Now, these kind of STA dwellings, Respite Accommodation dwellings, they can be used for exactly that, giving the parents a break for a couple of days or 2 weeks or so. Because there is that funding there, the core funding in place, which can be tapped into to use for covering this. And this covers their accommodation costs, the care, the food, the trip there. It's basically covered by the provider doing the Respite Accommodation service. And this is an area that Plan for Life Australia wants to specialise in, isn't it, Rob?
Yes, correct. So, and as you mentioned, the parents or the carers might want to go on a holiday themselves somewhere else. So the participant needs to be looked after. So their existing carers can come with them to this respite accommodation, or we can look to provide carers so that their existing carers can have a break as well. Yeah, there's just a lot of opportunity in this area. The other aspect to this that the SILs and the plan managers and the support coordinators talk about how it's undersupplied is their participants are going to do group activities in centres around the country. So they might go for 2, 3, 4 hours or a day where they can, paint or they can play games. There's just all sorts of activities that are provided for them just so they can get out of their own environment, their own home, and give everyone a quick break. This is where this can be targeted as well with the STA. We can tailor specific reasons and activities for them to do in the time that they're in one of these homes, which makes it even more attractive. So that's where we're heading with it.
The activities, yeah, exactly. The activities that you referred to, Rob, they could range from horse riding to art classes to a field trip with other participants, to going to the AFL match on the weekend, going to the opera, cinemas.
Yeah, correct. There's all sorts of things, whether it's outside the home or it could even be just inside the home.
Now, when you and I spoke last week with your colleague, who's the operations manager of that other SIL provider, he mentioned to you and I that because it's winter at the moment, there's outdoor activities aren't really a big thing at the moment because it's just too cold in Melbourne.
Particularly in Melbourne.
So the indoor, did they say virtual reality kind of products, activities? They are the key in-demand thing at the moment, is that right?
That'll be the differentiator from others that are supplying this accommodation. When you set up one of these homes, you might want to just put in a number of board games. We talked about you might want to put the video game consoles in, the Xbox, the PlayStation, and maybe take it a step further and incorporate some virtual reality and augmented reality as the technology for that improves going forward.
Yes.
Your Oculus Rift, where the participants can spend a day playing games where they feel like they're there, or where it's heading in the future is they might be able to have experiences through these games consoles and the television where they feel like they're at this location.
Yeah.
So that's where it's heading, where they can have that experience going forward, and they may be happy to do that for a few days within the home and not actually even leave the home. But it gives everyone a break. It stimulates them mentally and gives them different options to what they're used to. So that's the attraction for this and why we think that it'll actually work very well.
Yep. I want to reiterate to our listeners again the importance of this topic here. A big question often asked to us as from these potential SDA property investors is it in an area of demand? Can you guarantee me tenants for my SDA dwelling? What happens if it's empty? Well, this topic here covers the answer. What happens if it's empty? If for some reason and I use an example. Let's say you bought an apartment on St Kilda Beach, which was SDA compliant, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom for an HPS participant, for example, right? St Kilda Beach, You spend $1 million on it, as an example. You find it hard to fill it up with a long-term tenant who is a HPS tenant, funding from the STA. And so you say to yourself, well, what do I do now? What's my fallback position? Well, fallback position number one is to rent it to a normal tenant. $600-700 a week in rent, number one. Number two, use it as an MTA dwelling, whereby the NDIS pays $140 or $150 per night per person in this dwelling that's HPS, for a HPS participant waiting for their eventual house or home to be built. So that comes under MTA. MTA overnight rates are about $140 per night, so about $1,000 a week per participant in this scenario here. Okay. Number three is short-term accommodation respite accommodation. Okay. So what does that mean? You have this wonderful apartment at St Kilda Beach, fully furnished, which has some beanbags, TVs, beds, maybe a hoist, virtual reality toys, gears, Xbox machine, games. Everything's all provided for, and it allows someone to come here who's in a wheelchair to be with a carer, 2 carers, day shift, night shift person. And the NDIS is providing a daily rate, overnight rate of about, I think it's about $1,600 a night.
Yeah, it's around about $1,700 a night, but you've got to bear in mind that includes the cost of care. So
the cost payable by the NDIS for short-term accommodation respite for a given week, 7 days, is about $16,000 in revenue to this transaction. Right now, under the Shards award rate for the carers, there's penalty rates for staying overnight and also weekends. So probably about $5,000 goes towards wages for the carers. So it's 24/7 care, day shift, night shift, so 2 carers for that whole 7-day trip, for example. Then there's food costs. You might organise trips to wherever and events and whatnot. So all that shows you how powerful or lucrative the respite accommodation sector can become for a property investor who is aligned with a provider that specialises in respite accommodation. So, it's going to be very difficult working with a civil provider or a housing provider. You need a short-term accommodation specialist to doing this exactly for property investors.
So with all of those other providers.
So this example here, Rob, I think covers the what if my HPS property is empty. This covers it right here. There you go. Right.
Correct. Just means, as you said, you'd have to fully furnish the house a bit more than you'd be considering under the normal scenario, and then spend a little bit more money making it more desirable with the games and the virtual reality.
Yes. So if you are a property owner who has multiple properties, which may be in places of desirable lifestyle locations in Victoria, then certainly reach out to Rob from Plan for Life Australia. Rob, what's your contact details there, Rob?
Contact details?
Yeah,
people can reach me at rob@planforlife.com.au. You can also reach me on my mobile, 0417 172 677, or you can go to our websites that we'll have up and running by the time this podcast is aired, and that is plan-for-life.com.au or planforlifeaustralia, or one word, .com.au. That's where we're setting up the respite contact details, and we'll eventually be using that to do bookings, provide information on these lifestyle areas, and also the particular homes that we may be able to offer accommodation for. So we're looking for investors to partner up with this, who provide the accommodation, and we provide the contact details and the participants and help manage the overall process for them.
So I want to bring it back to stories and examples of what's happened in the last few weeks with us. We have a client who's in Melbourne. He has a 4-bedroom unit in Moonee Ponds, and he's waiting for it to be vacated so that he can do some minor renovations, refurbish it, furnish it actually, and make it more suitable to like an Airbnb style environment, but specifically for Respite Accommodation. Okay, so he's working very closely with us from a consultation point of view to help him and guide him to create a homely environment for participants to have that break away from home. In addition, he also has a improved livability home, which is a OOA plus 2 IL bedrooms, and that may also be used, I think, for respite accommodation if he cannot get participants in this house with his provider. Now, that's one example of a property investor there who is shifting over towards the STA side of things. Last week I was in Sydney and I was in Ryde, and I met up with a client who had 2 blocks of land in Blue Mountains, and he came to us with my colleague Tina from MHA Design to look at doing HBS or whatever homes on these 2 blocks of land in the Blue Mountains. I looked at the stats and data up there in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, and it didn't have that many STA participants and demand for that region. However, I said to him, look, I'm not saying don't build their HBS homes on the site, but consider a different approach, meaning build them as FA, fully accessible homes, and maybe IL houses side by side. But your target market is participants for short-term accommodation, respite. Because I think Parramatta Penrith is 45 minutes to an hour or half an hour away from Blue Mountains. Rob, do you know the information, the location? How far is Penrith from Blue Mountains?
The Blue Mountains is really only probably an hour and a half from pretty much all of Sydney and the North Shore.
Yeah.
Great area to go on a holiday, yes. So it's a perfect option.
Exactly.
For a short getaway for people who live in that area. Exactly. It could even be an option for people from interstate.
Yes, exactly.
To go there as well.
So I explained to this.
I've been for a holiday in the Blue Mountains in the past.
Yeah. I explained to this client, yes, we can build you an STA house, but use it for short-term accommodation because people in Sydney want to get away for a weekend, want to get away for the week, right? There's nothing better than getting away with your carer to explore a new area and have a good time away from home. So that's an example where we still consulted to the client that he should consider building an STA dwelling on these 2 blocks of land in Blue Mountains, but use it for a different purpose. And that's an example of lending our advice in our strategic planning with him to help him design a house, an SDA house, specifically for short-term stay, and it will still be compliant with the NDIS.
Yes, you've got both bases covered in the future if you want to let it out on a more permanent basis.
Exactly. So these 2 dwellings in the Blue Mountains can be used as STA, MTA, or SDA, and even Airbnb. They're the 4 types of rental options he has for these dwellings, and he was happy to move forward and consider that as well. So as you can see, listeners, there's many different ways to skin a cat. Sorry for the blunt example there, but you can use your property strategy for short-term stay as well as long-term stay, and there are different providers in the market: Sills, housing, short-term respite people who provide different services. And unfortunately, Rob, as you know, you and I have realised this, many of these SIL providers out there, they don't really understand it, nor do they have the time to even focus on this area. It's a niche area, isn't it, Rob? Very niche.
It is, but it's one that they understand there is a need for, and plenty of demand that they will just refer some of their participants straight into these accommodation options.
Before we hang up and move on and finish the episode, Rob, I want to tell you the numbers again. There are 4.5 million people in Australia, of 27 million people, I think. 4.5 million people who are disabled in some form capacity. There is right now 530,000 in the NDIS scheme. Of that number, 530,000, roughly, 6% is SDA. The other 94% is over here. We're still funding.
So the target market for this is huge.
And all those people in the 94% category, they all have core funding. From 10 grand to, to a couple $100,000. right? And our social impact here as a concept here of short-term accommodation is to provide one participant 1 day of respite away from home or wherever they are to give them a life-changing experience. Because I'm sure that there are many participants in Australia who've never been to the beach, who've never ridden a horse before. I know I haven't. Who've never had an art class session before, who've never gone to the opera before, who've never been to the AFL match before. I know there's plenty of people out there who've never had the chance to do so. And the NDIS scheme has the funding in place for participants to give them a break in life, and that is this respite accommodation. So the numbers are huge, aren't they, Rob?
Yeah, they are. I think we worked out the total addressable market was some extraordinary figure that we thought it was a mistake. But as you mentioned, there's potentially a lot of participants that can access this. So there's plenty of homes and locations that are needed for it.
So the average participant in Australia is 74,000 funding per year. 25% of that is not being used. So a quarter of 74 is how much, Rob?
$18,500, which is
which happens to be the same, almost the same number.
Yep.
7 days.
Correct.
So there's an old saying in life: if you don't use it, you lose it. So a participant who has $74,000 of funding and not using all their funding will lose that $18,000 every year if they don't use it. So I say to you, Mr. Participants out there, if you're getting free accommodation, free care, free holiday, free food, free trip, and a break away from life, take it. Use it. Enjoy your life. This is what the NDIS scheme is all about, to improve the livelihoods of people who are in the scheme to better their lives in any way. So slowly but surely, Rob, I'm slowly getting private inquiries directly to me in my office about this topic, of which I referred them to you as well, because this is a very niche area of the NDIS, and we want to provide a social impact to the participants out there. And if we can change one life at a time, and utilising the scheme to their advantage, to their benefit, then we want to do so in every way, shape or form. We encourage any support coordinators, plan managers, SIL providers out there who are listening to this podcast to contact Rob at Plan for Life Australia, just to get some ideas as to how we as a group can help the other service providers and all the participants out there, and collaborate to do something good for the community.
Correct.
Rob, any final words before we hang up?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. So we look forward to being able to help people in the future and give investors another option that might lead to an income stream for them down the track as well.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Rob. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.